The metal walls of the trading station groaned as another ship docked outside, sending a low vibration through the floor. Daniel Hayes felt it under his boots as he carried a heavy toolbox down a narrow hallway painted in dull gray. He was not important here. He knew that. Nobody had told him directly, but the looks he got from the alien workers said enough. Humans were new to this part of space, and most species still saw them as clumsy children who had just learned to walk among the stars. The station was called Corval Outpost, a floating hub built by an alliance of several alien races who traded goods, weapons, and information far from their home worlds. It sat near a cluster of dead planets, close enough to nothing that most ships avoided it unless they had business there. Daniel had been sent as part of a small human group, mostly to prove that humans could work alongside other species without causing trouble. So far, his job had nothing to do with proving anything. He fixed broken pipes, replaced burnt wiring, and cleaned filters in the lower levels where the important people never went. He did not complain. Back on Earth, he had grown up on a small farm where his family took in injured animals nobody else wanted. He had bottle-fed wolves with broken legs and calmed horses that other people were afraid to touch. That kind of patience did not seem to matter here, not when the aliens judged strength by weapons and rank, not by quiet hands and careful eyes. As he turned a corner near the lower storage bay, he noticed a group of station guards standing outside a large steel door, tension written across their strange faces. Their species, tall and thin with silver-gray skin, were usually calm and quiet. Now their eyes darted nervously, and their weapons were raised halfway, ready to fire at any moment. "What is it?" Daniel asked one of the workers passing by, a small furry alien with wide black eyes. "The beast," the alien whispered, voice shaking slightly. "They caught something new, a monster. It already killed 2 handlers this morning." Daniel's curiosity picked up, though he tried to keep walking. Word about the creature had already spread across the lower decks in whispers. Some called it a draconis, an old word from a dead empire that once ruled this part of the galaxy. It was said to be a living weapon, built long ago for war, now found drifting in an abandoned research vessel and brought here for study. Nobody knew much else, only that it was massive, dangerous, and refused to be tamed. Scientists wanted to study it. Soldiers wanted to weaponize it. So far, it had done nothing but destroy every attempt to control it. Daniel continued his rounds, fixing a broken coolant line near the containment section, when the entire station suddenly shook. Alarms blared through the hallways, red lights flashing along the walls. Static crackled over the speakers before a panicked voice announced a containment breach in Sector 9, the exact area Daniel was standing near. People ran past him in every direction, aliens of different shapes and sizes pushing each other aside in their hurry to escape. Doors slammed shut automatically, sealing off sections of the station. Daniel pressed himself against the wall as a group of armed guards rushed by, shouting orders in a language he barely understood. Most people were running away. Daniel, without fully deciding to, found himself walking toward the alarm instead. He told himself it was curiosity, but deep down, something older pulled at him, the same instinct that once made him walk calmly toward frightened, wounded animals when everyone else backed away. He reached the containment section just as another explosion rattled the corridor, shaking dust from the ceiling. Through a cracked viewing window, he saw it for the first time. The Draconis. It was enormous, easily 3 times the size of a large truck, covered in thick dark scales that shimmered faintly under the flickering emergency lights. Its long neck thrashed against a weakening energy barrier, wings folded tightly against its back, claws tearing at the floor beneath it. Its eyes glowed a deep amber, filled with pain and fury. Behind him, more guards arrived, weapons raised, ready to fire the moment the barrier failed completely. Daniel could see burn marks and cuts across the creature's body, wounds that had clearly been inflicted during earlier attempts to subdue it. It was not just angry, it was suffering. The barrier flickered again, sparks flying from the damaged generator beside it. Everyone around Daniel stepped back, preparing to run or fight, but Daniel stayed exactly where he was, staring through the cracked glass at the massive creature thrashing in pain and fear. Nobody noticed him quietly moving toward the door control panel, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. He had made a decision, one that would either save lives or end his own in the next few minutes. The barrier sparked one final time and shut down completely, leaving nothing between the wounded, furious Draconis and the terrified station full of people who had never once tried to understand it. Silence fell over the corridor for one heartbeat after the barrier died, and in that silence, the massive creature stopped thrashing. It felt the sudden absence of resistance and turned its huge head toward the open space in front of it. Guards shouted behind Daniel, some ordering him to move back, others screaming for backup. He heard none of it clearly. His full attention was fixed on the Draconis standing just a few steps away, breathing hard, blood dripping from a wound along its shoulder. Daniel raised both hands slowly, palms open, the same way he used to approach injured horses that had been beaten by careless owners. He kept his movements slow, his breathing steady, refusing to let fear control his body even though every instinct screamed at him to run. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody here is going to hurt you right now, just breathe." The Draconis let out a low growl, deep enough that Daniel felt it vibrate through his chest. Its amber eyes locked onto him, studying him the way a wounded animal studies anything that gets too close. Behind him, he heard a guard cock his weapon, ready to fire the moment the creature made any aggressive move. "Don't," Daniel said sharply, not even turning around. "If you shoot now, it panics, and then everyone here dies. Just wait." Nobody argued, mostly because nobody had a better plan. Daniel took one slow step forward, keeping his hands visible, his eyes lowered slightly to avoid appearing challenging. The Draconis shifted its weight, claws scraping against the metal floor, but it did not attack. It watched him carefully, head tilted slightly, almost curious despite its pain and fear. He noticed the wound on its shoulder more clearly now, a deep burn mark surrounded by cracked scales, likely from an earlier failed capture attempt. There were other marks too, older scars along its neck and legs, signs of repeated mistreatment. This was not a mindless monster. This was a creature that had been hurt again and again by people who saw it only as a weapon to be controlled. "They hurt you," Daniel said softly, almost to himself. "That's why you're so angry." The Draconis lowered its head slightly, its growl softening into something closer to a low, rumbling breath. Daniel took another step closer, close enough now that he could feel the heat radiating from its massive body. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hands remained steady. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued, keeping his tone calm and even. "I just want to help, that's all." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The creature stared at him, amber eyes filled with pain, exhaustion, and something else, something that looked almost like disbelief. Then, slowly, impossibly, the Draconis lowered its massive head toward Daniel, stopping only inches away from him. Gasps echoed through the corridor behind him. Guards lowered their weapons slightly, too stunned to react properly. The creature that had killed 2 handlers that same morning, the beast every species on the station feared, stood calmly with its head bowed before a single human who had walked toward it instead of away. Daniel reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly despite his efforts to stay calm, and gently placed his palm against the side of the Draconis's snout. The creature's skin felt rough and warm beneath his fingers, its breathing slowing as it seemed to relax under his touch. "There you go," Daniel whispered. "See, nobody's going to hurt you now." The moment stretched on, the corridor completely silent except for the creature's steady breathing and the distant hum of the station's damaged systems. Then, footsteps echoed from further down the hall as station security finally arrived in full force, weapons raised. "Ready to open fire." "Everyone stand down," Daniel called out immediately, his voice firm despite the chaos around him. "Look at it, it's calm. If you shoot now, you'll ruin everything." The lead security officer, a tall alien with silver-gray skin and sharp yellow eyes, stared in disbelief at the scene before him. The Draconis stood peacefully beside a human, its head lowered in what looked disturbingly like submission, something none of them had ever witnessed from the creature before. "Lower your weapons," the officer finally ordered, his voice filled with confusion and reluctant respect. "Nobody fires unless it attacks." The guards slowly lowered their weapons, though their eyes remained fixed on the massive creature and the human standing calmly beside it. Daniel kept his hand gently resting against the Draconis's snout, feeling its warm breath against his skin, feeling something shift between them that he could not fully explain. Word of what happened in Sector 9 spread through the station within minutes, passed along in hurried whispers between confused and frightened workers. By the time Station Command arrived to assess the situation, nearly everyone on Corval Outpost had heard some version of the story, each one stranger than the last. A human, someone nobody had taken seriously until now, had calmed the deadliest creature in the sector using nothing but calm words and an open hand. News traveled faster than light on Corval Outpost, or at least it felt that way to Daniel as he sat inside a small holding room, waiting for someone important enough to decide what to do with him. Two guards stood outside the door, though he was not sure if they were there to protect him or keep him from leaving. Either way, he had been sitting for nearly an hour, replaying the last few hours in his mind, still not fully believing what had happened himself. The door finally slid open, and a tall alien entered wearing a long dark coat covered in small silver markings that Daniel did not recognize. Her skin was pale blue, almost translucent under the harsh light, and her eyes held the sharp, calculating look of someone used to studying things rather than talking to them. She introduced herself as Dr. Rayla, lead researcher assigned to the Draconis project. "You understand this creature killed two of my best handlers this morning," she said, taking a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Trained professionals, armed with proper equipment and years of experience, and yet it lowered its head for you, a maintenance worker." Daniel shrugged slightly, unsure how to explain something he barely understood himself. "I didn't do anything special, I just didn't treat it like a weapon." Rayla's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." "Back where I'm from," Daniel began, choosing his words carefully, "I grew up around injured animals. Wolves, horses, sometimes worse. Most people are afraid of anything that can hurt them, so they either avoid it or try to control it through force. Both approaches usually make things worse." He thought back briefly to his childhood, standing beside his father in a small barn back on Earth, watching him gently approach a wounded wolf that everyone else had given up on. His father never raised his voice, never made sudden movements, just spoke calmly and waited until the animal trusted him enough to accept help. Daniel had learned that lesson early, long before he ever imagined applying it somewhere among the stars. "The Draconis wasn't just angry," Daniel continued. "It was hurt and scared. Every time someone tried to capture it, they probably used force, right? Weapons, restraints, maybe even pain to control it." Rayla's expression shifted slightly, confirming his suspicion without needing to say it directly. The Draconis had been captured using aggressive methods, restrained with devices designed to cause pain if it resisted, all in an attempt to break its will quickly rather than earn its trust slowly. "You saw its wounds," Daniel said. "Burn marks, old scars. That's not a monster born violent. That's a creature that learned violence was the only way to survive." Rayla studied him carefully, clearly reconsidering her earlier assumptions. "Our scanners detected nothing unusual about you. No hidden technology, no special abilities. Just a human who happened to remain calm during a crisis." "That's all it was," Daniel confirmed. "Patience and understanding what fear looks like." The conversation continued for another hour, Rayla asking detailed questions about his background, his methods, his understanding of animal behavior. Daniel answered honestly, though he sensed she was still searching for some hidden explanation, something that fit neatly into her scientific understanding of the galaxy. The idea that a simple human maintenance worker succeeded where trained professionals failed clearly troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Eventually, Station Command summoned them both to a larger meeting room, where several alien officials from different species had gathered to discuss the situation. Daniel felt distinctly out of place among the tall, imposing figures, most of whom looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "The creature has refused all food and water since the incident," one official explained, his voice sharp and impatient. It remains calm only when the human is nearby. This presents a problem. Or an opportunity, another voice interjected, this one belonging to a broad-shouldered alien with dark green skin, clearly someone with military authority based on the medals covering his uniform. The Draconis is valuable. If this human can control it, then use him. The room fell into heated discussion, various officials arguing about the best course of action, most of them speaking as if Daniel was not even present. Some wanted to study him further, searching for whatever secret method he used. Others simply wanted to exploit his unexpected success, assigning him as a handler regardless of his own wishes on the matter. Daniel remained quiet through most of the discussion, listening carefully, growing more uncomfortable with how easily they spoke of the Draconis as nothing more than a tool to be used. Finally, when the arguing paused long enough, he spoke up. "If you want my help," he said firmly, "it's not going to work the way you're used to. No force, no punishment, no using it as a weapon. If you want the Draconis calm, you need to let me handle this my way." Silence followed his words, several officials exchanging uncertain glances. The green-skinned military officer studied him closely, clearly not used to being spoken to so directly by a human, especially one so far beneath his own rank and status. "You would defy direct orders?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "I'm telling you what works," Daniel replied calmly, refusing to back down despite the tension filling the room. "You can either trust that, or you can go back to losing handlers." After a tense pause, Dr. Rayla finally spoke, her earlier skepticism replaced with something closer to reluctant respect. "Assign him as primary handler, effective immediately." The decision was made, though clearly not one everyone in the room agreed with. As Daniel left the meeting room, he could feel the weight of countless suspicious eyes following him, aliens who still could not understand how a simple human had managed to succeed where they had failed so completely. The days that followed felt strange to Daniel, as if he had stepped into someone else's life without warning. Instead of fixing pipes and replacing wiring in the lower levels, he now spent his mornings walking through heavily guarded corridors toward the containment section, greeted by nervous glances from station workers who still could not quite believe what had happened. The Draconis remained in a large holding chamber, one that had been hastily modified after the incident to remove some of the harsher restraint devices used previously. Daniel had insisted on this change immediately, arguing that continued mistreatment would only make things worse regardless of who handled the creature. Rayla had reluctantly agreed, though she made it clear she still doubted his methods would hold long-term. On his first proper visit as official handler, Daniel entered the chamber slowly, carrying nothing but a simple container of food, something the station's science team had prepared based on what little they knew about the creature's diet. The Draconis lifted its head the moment he entered, amber eyes locking onto him immediately, though its posture remained far calmer than it had been with anyone else. "Hey," Daniel said softly, setting the container down a good distance away, giving the creature space rather than forcing closeness. "I brought you something to eat, no rush." The Draconis watched him carefully, clearly still cautious despite their earlier encounter. Daniel sat down on the cold metal floor, keeping a respectful distance, simply waiting patiently rather than pushing the creature to trust him immediately. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound being the quiet hum of the chamber's ventilation system. Eventually, hunger won out over caution, and the Draconis moved slowly toward the food, eating carefully while keeping one eye on Daniel the entire time. He said nothing further, simply allowing the moment to unfold naturally, understanding that trust could not be rushed, no matter how impatient the station's leadership became. Over the following days, this pattern continued, each visit slightly longer than the last, each interaction building slowly upon the foundation of the first. Daniel learned to read the creature's body language, understanding when it felt anxious, when it felt curious, and eventually, when it felt something closer to comfort in his presence. He began speaking to it regularly, not expecting understanding, but finding that the simple act of talking seemed to ease its tension. Word spread quickly across the station, about the unusual bond forming between the human handler and the creature everyone still feared. Some workers watched from a safe distance whenever Daniel walked the Draconis through wider containment areas for exercise, whispering among themselves about how impossible the sight seemed. Others avoided the area entirely, still convinced the creature would eventually turn violent again. Not everyone viewed the situation positively. Several alien officers, particularly those from more militaristic backgrounds, grew increasingly frustrated watching a human succeed at something they considered beneath proper training methods. Among them was Commander Draven, the broad-shouldered officer who had first suggested exploiting Daniel's abilities during the earlier meeting. Draven made no secret of his belief that gentleness was weakness, and that the Draconis should be trained through discipline rather than patience. "This won't last," Draven said one afternoon, watching from behind reinforced glass as Daniel calmly examined a healing wound along the Draconis's leg. "Creatures like this respect strength, not kindness. Eventually, it will remember what it truly is." Daniel ignored the comment, though he was aware Draven's opinion carried weight among certain station officials who still wanted the Draconis prepared for military use rather than simple containment. Tension between the two approaches grew steadily, though for the moment, Daniel's methods continued producing results nobody could deny. The bond between Daniel and the Draconis deepened further one evening when station power flickered unexpectedly during a minor system malfunction, plunging the containment chamber into sudden darkness. Alarms briefly sounded before emergency lighting kicked in, casting the room in dim red light. Daniel, caught mid-visit, remained perfectly still, aware that sudden darkness could easily trigger the creature's earlier fear responses. Instead of panicking, the Draconis moved closer to him, its massive body curling protectively around his smaller form, almost as if shielding him from whatever danger it perceived in the darkness. Daniel felt the warmth radiating from its scales, heard its steady breathing beside him, and realized in that moment just how much trust had grown between them without either of them fully realizing it. When power returned moments later, station security rushed into the chamber, weapons raised out of habit, only to find Daniel sitting calmly beside the Draconis, both completely unharmed. The image of the fearsome creature, protecting rather than attacking, spread quickly through the station, further confusing those who still viewed it purely as a dangerous weapon. Despite this progress, Commander Draven's frustration only grew. He began pushing station leadership harder, arguing that the Draconis needed to prove its combat usefulness soon, regardless of the delicate trust Daniel had spent weeks building. Rayla, though impressed by Daniel's success, found herself caught between scientific curiosity and mounting pressure from military officials demanding practical results. Daniel sensed the growing tension building around him, aware that forces beyond his control were shaping decisions that could easily undo everything he had worked toward. He continued his daily visits regardless, determined to protect the fragile trust he had built, even as whispers of combat trials and forced testing grew louder throughout the station's higher levels. 3 weeks after Daniel first calmed the Draconis, Station Command called an emergency meeting that he was not invited to, though he learned about it quickly enough through quiet warnings from a few sympathetic workers who had grown fond of him over the past weeks. Commander Draven had finally convinced enough officials that the Draconis needed to prove its usefulness through controlled combat trials, arguing that continued gentle handling wasted valuable military potential. Daniel confronted Rayla directly the moment he heard, finding her in her office reviewing data late into the station's artificial night cycle. "Combat trials," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Is that true?" Rayla sighed, rubbing her temples with visible exhaustion. "Draven has support from the Alliance Council. They believe the Draconis represents a valuable asset that we've kept restrained too long. They want proof it can function as intended." "It's not a weapon," Daniel said firmly. "It's a living creature that finally started trusting someone after years of abuse. Forcing it into combat will destroy everything we've built." "I know," Rayla admitted quietly, "but my objections carry less weight than Draven's military authority. The council has already approved a preliminary trial for tomorrow. Daniel left her office, feeling a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same frustration he had felt watching people mistreat animals back on Earth simply because they viewed them as tools rather than living beings. He spent that night sitting beside the Draconis in its chamber, unable to sleep, aware that everything he had worked toward now hung dangerously close to collapse. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Daniel was summoned to a large training arena deep within the station's military section, a wide circular space surrounded by reinforced glass and heavily armed guards positioned at every entrance. Commander Draven stood waiting, along with several other officials, including a visibly uncomfortable Rayla standing slightly apart from the others. "This is a mistake," Daniel said immediately, approaching Draven without hesitation, despite the obvious difference in rank between them. "This is necessary," Draven replied coldly. "The Council needs proof of combat capability before further resources are invested in this project. The creature will face a controlled opponent, nothing more." Before Daniel could argue further, the arena doors opened, and two armored guards led the Draconis inside using restraint devices that immediately caused it visible distress. Its calm demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by the same frightened aggression Daniel had first witnessed weeks earlier. The creature thrashed against its restraints, clearly remembering past mistreatment. Its trust shattered the moment the familiar pain returned. "Release it," Daniel demanded, moving toward the arena entrance, only to be blocked by two guards following Draven's orders. The restraints released suddenly, and the Draconis stumbled forward into the open arena, disoriented and terrified. Across from it, a large mechanical combat drone activated, its weapon systems powering up with a low mechanical whine. The Draconis, sensing immediate danger, reared back and let out a deafening roar, the same terrifying sound that had once caused an entire station to panic. Daniel didn't hesitate. He pushed past the guards holding him back, ignoring their shouted warnings, and ran directly into the arena toward the panicking creature. "Daniel, stop!" Rayla screamed from behind him, her voice filled with genuine fear. He ignored her too, focused entirely on reaching the Draconis before the combat drone's weapons fully activated. The creature's amber eyes locked onto him as he approached, still filled with fear and confusion, claws digging into the arena floor as it prepared to either flee or attack whatever came near. "It's me," Daniel called out, slowing his approach despite every instinct telling him to hurry. "Look at me. It's okay, I'm here." The Draconis hesitated, its aggressive stance faltering slightly as recognition flickered through its panic. Behind Daniel, the combat drone's weapons systems finished charging, targeting locked onto the largest threat within the arena, which unfortunately now included Daniel standing directly beside it. "Abort the trial," Rayla shouted toward the control room, but the mechanical drone had already been given its combat protocols, too far into its sequence to stop immediately. The drone opened fire just as Daniel reached the Draconis, energy blasts streaking across the arena floor. Time seemed to slow as Daniel realized there was no way to avoid the incoming attack. Then, faster than anyone expected, the Draconis moved, curling its massive body around him, wings spreading wide to shield him completely from the incoming barrage. Energy blasts struck against its thick scales, causing it to roar in pain, but it did not retreat, did not abandon the human trembling beneath its protective form. Guards scrambled to shut down the drone's systems as Rayla screamed orders into her communicator, chaos erupting throughout the control room above. Finally, the drone powered down, its combat sequence forcibly terminated. Silence fell over the arena, broken only by the Draconis' heavy breathing and Daniel's own racing heartbeat. Slowly, the creature lowered its wings, revealing Daniel completely unharmed beneath its protective embrace, several fresh wounds visible across its scaled back where the energy blasts had struck. Every alien in the control room stared down in stunned silence, watching as the supposedly mindless beast had chosen, without hesitation, to protect a single human life over its own safety. Commander Draven stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely shattered by what he had just witnessed. Daniel slowly stood, placing a trembling hand against the Draconis's wounded side. "Thank you," he whispered softly, feeling the creature's steady breathing beneath his palm. "Nobody's going to hurt you again, I promise." Aftermath of the failed combat trial spread through Corval Outpost faster than any previous rumor about the Draconis. Within hours, nearly every worker, soldier, and official aboard the station had heard some version of the story, each one emphasizing different details, but all agreeing on one undeniable fact. The creature everyone feared had willingly shielded a human with its own body, taking real damage rather than allowing him to be harmed. Station leadership convened an emergency council meeting that evening, this time with Daniel present from the very beginning, no longer treated as an afterthought in decisions concerning the creature he had spent weeks caring for. Commander Draven sat quietly near the back of the room, his usual confidence noticeably absent following the events in the arena. Dr. Rayla opened the meeting, her tone far more serious than during previous discussions. "What happened today cannot be dismissed as coincidence," she stated firmly, addressing the gathered officials. The Draconis demonstrated genuine protective instinct toward Daniel Hayes, choosing to endure significant harm rather than allow him to be injured. This is not behavior typical of a mindless weapon. "It's behavior typical of trust," Daniel added, standing near the center of the room despite feeling distinctly out of place among the Alliance's senior officials. "Something none of you managed to earn through fear and force." Silence followed his words, several officials exchanging uncomfortable glances. Even Commander Draven remained quiet, unable to argue against what everyone in the arena had witnessed firsthand. An investigation quickly revealed that Draven had deliberately rushed the combat trials approval process, bypassing proper safety protocols in his eagerness to prove the Draconis' military value. Further digging uncovered that he had also been responsible for authorizing the earlier aggressive capture methods used before Daniel's involvement, methods that had caused most of the creature's original wounds and trauma. Faced with clear evidence of his reckless decisions, Draven was formally removed from his position, his authority over the project stripped entirely by unanimous council vote. With Draven no longer influencing station policy, the remaining officials turned their attention toward determining the Draconis' future. Rayla proposed a new arrangement, one that acknowledged both the creature's intelligence and its clear bond with Daniel. "I recommend granting Daniel Hayes full guardianship status over the Draconis," she said, addressing the council directly. "Not as a handler bound by military orders, but as its rightful bondholder, a title recognized among several species present in this alliance as one carrying genuine respect and authority." The proposal sparked debate, some officials still hesitant to grant such authority to a human, particularly one so recently dismissed as unimportant. However, with the arena incident fresh in everyone's memory and no alternative solution proving nearly as effective, the council ultimately agreed. Daniel was formally recognized as the Draconis' bondholder, a decision that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. Following the council's decision, Daniel returned immediately to the containment chamber, eager to check on the Draconis' wounds from the earlier incident. He found the creature resting quietly, though it lifted its head the moment he entered, amber eyes brightening slightly with recognition. "Hey," Daniel said softly, moving closer without hesitation. "I heard you got hurt pretty bad today. Let me take a look." The Draconis allowed him close, without any trace of its earlier fear, lowering itself further to make examining its wounds easier. Daniel worked carefully, cleaning and treating the injuries with practiced hands, occasionally speaking softly to keep the creature calm throughout the process. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, focusing on a particularly deep wound along its side. "Protecting me like that, you could have run, nobody would have blamed you." The Draconis let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a sigh, nudging its massive head gently against Daniel's shoulder. He smiled slightly, understanding the gesture without needing words to explain it further. Over the following weeks, news of what happened aboard Corval Outpost spread beyond the station itself, reaching other outposts and eventually even the Alliance's central government. The story of a human who succeeded where trained professionals failed, who earned the trust of the galaxy's most feared creature through patience rather than force, became a topic of genuine curiosity among species who had previously dismissed humanity as unimportant. Slowly, attitudes began shifting, not dramatically, but noticeably enough for those paying attention. Other stations started requesting human personnel for situations involving difficult creatures or delicate negotiations, curious whether humanity's unusual approach might prove useful elsewhere. Humanity, once viewed as primitive newcomers barely worth acknowledging, began earning quiet respect among the Alliance's older species, one small interaction at a time. Daniel remained largely unaware of the broader impact his actions had caused, focused instead on his daily routine caring for the Draconis, now free from experimentation and mistreatment. Their bond continued growing stronger with each passing day, the creature following him loyally whenever permitted outside its chamber, its earlier aggression completely replaced by calm trust. One evening, as Daniel sat quietly beside the Draconis, watching the distant stars through a large observation window, the creature shifted closer, resting its massive head gently in his lap. Daniel placed a hand against its scales, feeling the steady rhythm of its breathing beneath his palm. "Guess we're stuck together now," he said softly, smiling as the Draconis let out a low, content rumble in response. Outside the station, word continued spreading quietly across the stars, carried by traders, travelers, and curious officials alike. The deadliest creature ever recorded within the Alliance's territory had chosen, without hesitation, to lower its head before a single human, not out of fear, but out of genuine trust and respect. It was a small story in the grand scale of galactic history, yet it marked the quiet beginning of humanity's rising reputation among the stars, one gentle, patient moment at a time.